Okay, this story actually begins in Baja California. I lived in Baja California for not consecutively, but in altogether, sum total of somewhere near between 25 and 27 years. While I was in Baja, which is in La Paz, which is on the Sea of Cortez side, I became very interested in the deep diving whales. Basically, that's the sperm whale and the beaked whales. I was also lucky enough to have a long-standing contact with Scripps Institute of Oceanography. So I got an awful lot of information about their diving behaviors and everything else from there. A short time ago, there was only 2 to 4 beaked whales actually known, Cuviers, and I can't remember what other one there was. Now there's something like 11 beaked whales known. The reason why they took so long to discover is that they have very long dives. Peary's beaked whale, I believe, has been measured up to 3 hours and 40 minutes on a single dive. And it's a medium-sized animal, not much bigger than the orca. Okay, the sperm whale as well. The deepest divers are the Peary's beaked whale and Cuvier's beaked whale, where they're both diving for, as I say, up to 3 hours, 40 minutes. And they're also going to incredible depths. We measure the depths in kilometers. It depends on the variety, but somewhere between 4 and 8 kilometers in depth. That's a hell of a deep dive. They're down there looking for their food, which is usually Humboldt squid, which is in the oxygen pore level. What has this got to do with what we're going to talk about? We'll come to that. I'm beginning at another point in my career, which is much earlier, when I was diving with Pipin Ferreiras, who we will come back to again, but he did very kindly invited me to dive with him in Cuba. At that time, Jacques Mayol's book, Homo Delphinus, had just come out, and it was in French, the first copy. And in it was the story of Hagi Georgios Stati, a Greek sponge diver who rescued the anchor of the Regina Margherita, an Italian battleship. It's a whole story. You can view it on YouTube or on Wikipedia. And he rescued the anchor, located it, and rescued it in a depth of 77 meters. Okay, that's a story I've told many times. I won't go into that one in detail. One of the pertinent facts that came out of it, people were asking themselves how he could dive so deep and how he could dive so long. One of the dives was measured at 6 minutes, 40 seconds. That's a hell of a long way down. Don't forget, he was diving naked, without a nose clip, without packing, without meditation, without blue-green smoothies, without stretching, without visualizations. He was taking his Candela Petra and jumping off the side of the boat and going straight down. When he got to the bottom, which was a slope with sand and mud, he would tuck his Candela Petra, his stone, under his arm and walk along the bottom, searching with his feet for the anchor chain, which eventually he located and then put a gigantic shackle and pin and screwed it into the thing from another line, and then eventually they pulled the thing up. Now, when the Italian doctors examined Hagi, this is the interesting part here, they discovered that he had no eardrum in one ear and a torn one, totally torn, in the other ear. They were puzzled by this, but one thing stood out. No need to equalize, guys. immediately he would have flooded his sinuses and middle ear. Okay. They didn't know at that time that that was actually the way the Scandilopetra divers dive. Early on in their career, they burst their eardrums on purpose and kept them open by constant diving so that they could flood. Now, I became very interested in flooding, and so did Pippin, and we had a pretty close association at that time. And he was then diving with Audrey by this time. We met them again in Miami, where he was kind enough to invite myself and my wife to his house. And we were diving together, Maria Teresa and Audrey and Pippin, etc. And on No Limits on his boat. I think it was Olokun 1 or Olokun 2. I asked him whether he had solved the problem of liquid equalization, because before we parted in Cuba, he said to me, Aaron, I think I'm going to get laser holes put in my ears after he read the story of Hagistati. And I said, that sounds a bit extreme to me. Maybe there's another solution. So we parted and we were each looking for different solutions. So when we met again, I asked him whether he had solved the problem, and he said, yes, I have. And I said, how? He said, well, I just took off my nose clip and, actually he wasn't wearing a nose clip, sorry. He took his hand off his nose and flooded at somewhere between, he said, 80 and 90 meters. Okay. Later on, one of his students, Patrick Musimo, was the first person to pass 209 meters, 200 meters, with a dive to 209 meters. And Patrick was flooding. Pippin didn't particularly like to discuss in detail much about this, but Audrey, I understand, helped Patrick a lot. Just a quick aside here. Of all the people I have known, I personally think that Pippin was very badly bad-mouthed and assassinated on the internet by people who didn't know him, didn't understand the circumstances, and were absolutely uninformed about what went on. He was blamed for Audrey's death. Okay, in the end, it may turn out that Pippin left as a legacy, the greatest legacy of all the people in that time. And that's where we're looking at now. He perfected, demonstrated that liquid equalization, flooding, was actually an alternative way of getting to great depths. Patrick refined it and got to 209, as I said. Okay. We're approaching one thing. Look at what we're doing here with this one. If you're diving with a flooded ear, you don't have to worry about equalization after you're flooded. You just fall. And you can fall at any speed. Makes life a lot easier, doesn't it? Now, another thing is that, let's go back to our friends, the whales, that we learned from them. The whales are diving on empty lungs. Wow. Now, what's the secret? We have Peary's beaked whale, a fairly recent discovery, diving to colossal depths, 3 hours, 40 minutes. Where does it store all the oxygen for this? Years ago, I became fascinated by it, but not Peary's beaked whale. I was more fascinated at that time by the sperm whale and Cuvier's beaked whale. And I asked myself, how is this possible? How have they got enough oxygen? Their lungs are empty. Where are they getting it from? Some scientist in Scripps, and I can't remember who it was, which is a great pity, enlightened me. And he said, look, if we, for instance, have 90% hemoglobin and 10% myoglobin, I don't remember the exact figures, they have the reverse. They have much more myoglobin than we do. Myoglobin allows them to store oxygen in the muscles and use the muscles as a kind of bank from which they draw oxygen during the whole of the dive. That's the secret. So about 7 years ago, there was a scientist who I knew well called Erika Chagatai, who was attending a conference in Eilat. And at the end of the conference, I got a chance to have a discussion with her. And she said to me, Aaron, what are you thinking about nowadays? And I said, well, I'm thinking about our myoglobin hemoglobin ratio. I've been thinking about it for an awfully long time. And my question to all the scientists has been one, can we alter in our bodies the proportion of hemoglobin and myoglobin? Because if we could alter that by a few points, we would gain enormously more depth. Okay. She said, that sounds interesting, Aaron. Good question. Everybody, other physiologists I'd asked said, no, it's impossible. It's written in our DNA. Okay, well, several months later, I got a letter from her with a Eureka letter, where she said, I found it. And in a conversation with her subsequent to that, I found out that she was at the Everest base camp where they do acclimatization at 5,000 meters for altitude, for climbers who want to get to the top of Everest, which has got very, very little oxygen, at the top. And she said, I did blood tests on all these people, and I found out something significant. The proportion of myoglobin and hemoglobin changed. Now, they're not there for very long. That's a colossal piece of information. If it changes, we can change it, and it will be part of our adaptation to depth, and maybe even become a marker for us to understand whether we are well adapted to approach depth. Now, at the moment, I describe our current way of diving as a shit show. Everything is, when do you charge your mouth? First of all, I don't like the word charge. Last time I heard about charging was when the First World War, when they fixed bayonets and charged. I don't like English and Italian words brought in when you're talking English. There's a perfectly good English term, okay, this is my craziness, called fill your mouth. Okay, so all the discussions are about that. 7 years ago, we had the bloodbath in Kalamata, well documented by James Nestor, because the education agencies, bless their hearts, were giving us, as usual, wrong information and telling us that the deeper we charged, the deeper we could go. So everybody was diving over about 60 meters, was coming up spouting blood. This was not a pretty sign, and not the kind of thing that you want diving to progress to. Okay, then people did learn a lesson and they started to charge shallower and shallower. Wait a minute here. Now it's about, I understand somewhere, I don't do that. It's about between 18 and 20 meters that they charge at. Okay, why? Do you really need to charge? maybe you could improve your equalization technique, improve your relaxation, think of other things. And there are other techniques of equalization. I know for one that Madame Korok, who's a lovely lady, Fatima, doesn't use the standard equalization of T-lock, S-lock, M-lock, K-lock. No, S-lock's only for oral sex, forgive me that. And that kind of stuff. And she actually uses what's called reverse packing. Okay, that's bringing up air and it's combined with a BTV movement. So not everybody at the top of the tree equalizes the same way. The education agencies have got us fixated with the idea that there's only one way to dive. And this, I think, has led to the horror show of today. Why a horror show today? Because honestly, in the last few years, look at the male records. How much have they increased? 3 meters in depth, 4 meters in depth, over a period of years. We're coming to the end of how we can equalize safely at depth, filling hard air spaces in the skull with tiny amounts of air from a nearly totally empty lung. It's finite, it's got an end. The end is in sight, guys. And it's very much in sight because we see nowadays the business of drugs coming into freediving. So basically what's happening today is that we are pushing the limits of equalization and they're turning into a very, very hazardous situation. And the proof of this is the drugs that are creeping into freediving now. 60% of the drugs have purely a psychological effect. They make people braver because they know that they're going to injure themselves or certainly risk very bad injury. Now, a cumulative lung squeezes is not a way to continue diving. This, frankly, is a disgrace. The fact that there may be 1 or 2 divers who can go beyond the limit that we've got today without incurring the penalty of a severe accident. Okay, we've got 1 or 2, but how much more can they go on? This is going in the wrong direction, guys, completely. We have to think of a different alternative and a different approach. Air packing. This should have gone out a long time ago. Why do we need it? For equalization. Maybe there's a way where we can equalize that we don't need to pack. Because packing has its disadvantages. People practice packing dry. So the amount of pneumothoraxes per year from people trying to do lung stretching, doing stretching on a packed lung, which is still being advocated by at least one of the major educational agencies, I think is absolutely ridiculous. And if we take that underwater, the risks of lung squeeze get multiplied by many times. What else does packing do for us? It gives us more resistance to going down in the first 10, 20 meters. Because you're trying now to overcome maybe 20 to 25% more buoyancy. Hello. More buoyancy, more effort going down, and that means more CO2. CO2 is a major accelerator for nitrogen narcosis. So it means more nitrogen narcosis at the bottom, which is becoming increasingly dangerous. People go down there and lose the plot totally. And then what? And we'll have cases like that. The deeper we'll go, the more narcosis. And that's all coming at the moment from packing. What else? Decompression sickness. Your risk of decompression sickness and a serious hit is increased. Why should we pack? We go back to the same answer. Oh, because it enables us to equalize deeper. Well, we disproved the thing of the deeper you charge, the deeper you can go. But if we're going to pack at 18 meters, why don't we, sorry, if we're going to fill our mouths at 18 meters, why don't we fill them on the surface then? The whole thing becomes more and more ridiculous as we look at it. And we're diving less and less in the natural way. Now, I had a clash with somebody on the page called Science and Freediving. I think it's on Facebook, who was reminding me I was uncomplimentary about Enzo in a picture where I hadn't identified him correctly. And he was doing something pretty crazy. It looked like it. And I said, look, that's idiot. And I was held to task by outraged Italians who, how did I dare to say something bad about one of the pioneers of the sport. Look, we were all idiots in those days. Everybody was. We didn't have knowledge and we were playing with fire. That's the truth of the matter, whether you like it or not. And also pioneers, we now think that with Commander Raymond Butcher, the freediving world began in, what was it, 1949, 1950, somewhere between 49 and 52. That's ridiculous. The Minoans were freediving. We see it on their freezers, for food, for sponges, for salvage, everything else. The Greeks later on had an enormous tradition. The Arabs had a tradition. There were so many different nationalities, Polynesians, Micronesians, people from Indonesia and the Philippines, also noble traditions. The Moros, the Baju people, other of the various tribes, I can't remember them off by hand, it's not important, but somewhere always in a band around the world. I will have to mention, of course, the Ama divers of Korea and Japan. This band around the world, sort of 8 degrees above the equator and 8 degrees under the equator, is where we see an awful lot of the very early freedivers. But our tradition goes back thousands of years. Maybe in those thousands of years, where knowledge was passed on from father to son, maybe they actually knew something. Maybe freediving didn't begin in 1949. Maybe actually we should look further back and understand a bit more about the techniques that they were using. When I talked about Hagistati, his rescue of the Magina Margarita's anchor was in 1913. Hey guys, that was before the First World War. In the 1950s, between the 1950s and the 1960s, Enzo was trying to break the incredible barrier of 50 meters and being told by all the leading physiologists in the world, Enzo, you can't do that. We have demonstrated that you will get total lung collapse at 50 meters. Only death is waiting for you. Well, Enzo didn't pay too much attention to that, and eventually in his career went on to, I believe, 105 meters, and disproved the scientists yet again. I think that if we play around with these ideas, we can build a new model of freediving. Training in such a way that we alter the myoglobin ratio, training in such a way that we are flooding our sinuses and middle ear. Now, Patrick Musimo kept a diary. For 4 years, he was training at great depths, over 180 meters. Never once did he get an ear infection. Also, one of Patrick's last entries was that he was experimenting with going down with less and less air in the lung. This is the direction we should be looking at, guys. This is the direction of the future. I didn't invent it, the whales did. But if you understand why they dive that way, you cannot avoid the conclusion that that's a hell of a lot better way to dive than the way we do it. Now, we may not be able to get to several kilometers depth, but I can easily foresee the time when our better athletes find 200 meters, not a great problem. But it means changing not only that, but changing our outlook. The worst thing that I found in training people at the moment is people overthinking everything. They have to be in control of everything in their bodies. They have to control the soft palate. They have to control their glottis. They have to control their vocal cords. They have to control their tongue. Amongst all the usual things like head position, body position, etc., etc., etc. We're leaving that out of it. They have to be in control by the conscious mind. Wrong. The most important mind that we've got, if we're looking at it from a scientific point of view, it would be called not the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, but the orbitomedial prefrontal cortex. The dorsolateral is our highest cognitive executrix, it's called. The orbitomedial prefrontal cortex is the area of emotional, instinctive intelligence, the one that we do not consciously control. A child going up in an aeroplane or a car equalizes their ears pop. They're not learning Frenzel with all the K-lock, T-lock, what's it in order to pop their ears. You can't teach that to a child 3 months old, but their ears pop. Hey guys, we've got to rethink what we teach. We've got to rethink the way we dive. Otherwise, we're looking at great danger for little gain. And if you like it, the end of competitive freediving. So this is what I propose us investigating at the moment. I'm doing my best and we'll be doing videos on the conclusions. So I want to thank you all, those who've actually listened to the end of this thing, and wish you the very best of luck. And do hope you also can be invited into a small club of people to join us for information. Bye.